because while people may fear that the Democrats are moving too far to the left, the Republicans have no leadership and no message, and still have a pretty good edge here for the Democrats going into the midterms.
Why do they have no leadership? Donald Trump is a leader. Last night, he's like, we're gonna have a red wave. Frank, you've been doing some interesting polling on trade. He's in Wisconsin, the big Foxconn deal today. Thousands of jobs in Wisconsin. They're worried about Harley-Davidson, but we got Foxconn.
You look at the unemployment levels at record lows, Latinos and African Americans. You look at more money in their paychecks. People vote their pockets, and they vote their wallets, and they vote their bank accounts. And all of them are in favor of the GOP. But what I'm looking at in terms of immigration, it's not just about border security. In the end, do we feel safer as a country? And
safety,
it's
homeland.
Safety, security, and a sense of well-being.
And your poll question, which I found most interesting, is that 84% of respondents said that you should notify authorities when, crimes are committed, illegal immigrants, people in custody, keep them in custody. And I think most people want people united in their home countries, keep family together in their home countries.
Absolutely. They said two things. One, if people are arrested, given a choice between the authorities notifying ICE or being prohibited, 84% they should be notified.
Yeah.
And second, they said by 2 to 1, what should happen that families are here illegally? They should be sent home. And that's the general attitude that Americans have about immigration. Tougher borders with compassion and done the right way.
And Frank, we talked about this before, but the Democrats, they're looking for something in the trick bag to use against Trump, and they've tried everything. I mean, he's a demagogue, he's authoritarian, he's Hitler, he's Nazi, he's fascist. They tried everything. And his numbers were 47% in Harvard-Harris yesterday.
His numbers are higher than Barack Obama at this moment. But I got one for you also, and I'm waiting to see who jumps on it, which is energy security and the economics. If we actually turn our oil, our gasoline, and using natural gas, if we do that kind of energy change, which is easy to do, gas prices go down and the economy gets even stronger.
It's money in the pocket. Money in the pocket. People want money in the pocket, and conservatives were motivated in 2016 on the Supreme Court. Federal appellate court judgeships in the Supreme Court. People think it's geeky, not interested. My radio callers today were on fire about this retirement of Kennedy. And Schumer, et cetera, they're going to go to the mat. Let's watch Schumer today.
Our Republican colleagues in the Senate should follow the rule they set in 2016, not to consider a Supreme Court justice in an election year.
We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall.
He's making such a huge mistake. If they don't vote for it now, every Republican across the country will vote to keep Republicans to control the Senate.
They're motivated on this issue, guys. Exactly. We're going to have, I want you both on radio tomorrow, next day. We'll be right back. Thanks, as always, for being with us tonight. We continue to send our prayers, our thoughts, and our love to all those affected by another senseless and depraved shooting that we saw today down, of course, at the Capitol Gazette in Annapolis. Tell us how we're doing on Twitter. That's all the time we have tonight. We have a lot of news to cover tomorrow, so you're going to want to tune it right back in here tomorrow night in Fox News all through the day and night. Let's hand it off now to Shannon Breen.
A Fox News at Night exclusive, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, in his first interview since Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy announced his retirement. He answers Democrats who call him a hypocrite for vowing to push ahead with the nominee before the midterms. Plus, Ed Henry and Catherine Herridge have late-breaking developments on the Russia summit and the tense hearing on Capitol Hill today between FBI and DOJ officials and angry GOP lawmakers. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. This afternoon, law enforcement sped to the scene of the Capitol Gazette newspaper in Maryland following reports of an active shooter. Authorities say 5 people are dead, at least 2 others injured. Tonight, new details on the suspect in what's being called a targeted attack. We've got team coverage. Trace Gallagher taking a closer look at the reported suspect. But first, we go to the scene in Annapolis to correspondent Kristen Fisher. Good evening, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, what happened here today was one of the worst attacks on journalists ever in the history of the United States. And it all started around 2:30 this afternoon. A gunman entered the headquarters of the Capital Gazette newspaper right behind me with a shotgun and smoke grenades. He then shot and killed 5 employees, and police identified those victims just about 30 minutes ago at a press conference. And those victims, all 5 employees of the newspaper: Rob Hyacin, Wendy Winters, Gerald Fishman, John McNamara, and Rebecca Smith. As for the shooter, he has not officially been identified by police, but he has been identified by the Capital Gazette's parent company, the Baltimore Sun, and he's been identified as 38-year-old Jared Ramos. They say that he had a long-running feud with the paper. It started in 2011 when the Capital Gazette covered a criminal harassment case against him. Then in 2012, he filed a defamation lawsuit against the paper and the columnist who wrote the story, and then 3 years later, he lost that lawsuit, which brings us to today. Here's the deputy chief of Anne Arundel Police.
This was a targeted attack on the Capital Gazette. This person was prepared today to come in. This person was prepared to shoot people. His intent was to cause harm.
Now, at that press conference, the deputy police chief would not confirm what I'm about to tell you, but Fox has confirmed this with a separate law enforcement source in the state of Maryland, as have multiple other news organizations, and that is that this gunman has not been cooperative with police. He clearly wanted to make it very difficult for them to figure out who exactly he is. He didn't have an ID on him, and he even went so far as to mutilate his own fingertips. According to this law enforcement source, they were finally able to make a positive ID on him using facial recognition software. Now, police were able to take him into custody without ever firing a single shot. And what's even more remarkable is that they were on the scene within 60 seconds of getting that first call about an active shooter.
The response has been incredible, absolutely astounding. Within 1 minute, Anne Arundel County Police and sheriff's deputies, as well as the City of Annapolis Police Department, were on the scene and already in the building, demonstrating incredible courage. Not a moment's hesitation. They went straight into that building knowing there was someone in there with a weapon. And they were able to get to him in a matter of minutes and able to defuse the situation and bring him into custody.
Incredible. And just 1 week ago, Anne Arundel police were holding an active shooter drill, training for the very thing that took place here today. Everybody has been saying all night long, no doubt, Shannon, that that kind of training and that 60-second response time saved a lot of lives today. Shannon?
Yeah, and folks who are on the front lines of law enforcement every day, they are true heroes because they never know when this will be the day they get those calls. Our hats are off to them. Kristen, thank you very much. With new details on the reported identity of the suspect, let's go now to Trace Gallagher in our Los Angeles newsroom. He's been following this tragedy since it started to break this afternoon. Trace.
Yeah, Shannon, the Baltimore Sun, which owns the Capital Gazette newspaper, is now identifying the shooter as 38-year-old Jared Ramos, and police have confirmed the suspect made social media threats against the Capital Gazette in just the hours before the attack. Watch.
The Gazette through social media.
Can you say that they were violent threats? This was quite obvious and quite apparent that this individual had some type of a vendetta or against the Capital newspaper.
But we now know that Jared Ramos and the newspaper have been involved in a feud that dates back 7 years. In 2011, Capital staff writer Eric Thomas Hartley wrote an article about Ramos called "Jared Wants to Be Your Friend." The piece detailed how Ramos stalked a woman he went to high school with, calling her vulgar names and sending her messages saying things like, quote, "You're going to need a restraining order now," and quoting again, "You can't make me stop. I know all these things about you." And even though Jared Ramos later pled guilty to criminal harassment, he sued the Capital Gazette for defamation. His lawsuit was dismissed by a circuit court in 2012, and that dismissal was later upheld by the Maryland Court of Special Appeals, with the judge writing that Ramos had a fundamental failure to understand what defamation law is. Ramos then created a Twitter account using the handle Eric Hartley, the reporter who wrote the stalking story. Ramos later posted threats on the account, quoting, "Yes, Eric Thomas Hartley, you moved to 2, a reference to Hartley leaving the Capital Gazette and going on to say, oh, just go ahead and kill yourself already before I do, legally in court. In 2015, he sent this, quoting again, the problem with Hartley is he's a veteran bad journalist and proudly irresponsible like Charlie Hebdo. That post came just weeks after the attack on the Charlie Hebdo newspaper in Paris. In 2016, alleged shooter Jared Ramos began posting messages about Charles Moylan, the appellate judge who upheld the ruling against him. Quoting here, I'd say Moylan should kill himself, but I hope he lives to see this. And then for 2 years, Ramos did not post anything until today, where he wrote this about the judge, quote, blank you, leave me alone, Judge Moylan. And even though police say the shooter was targeting the Capital newspaper, the suspect was fully aware the reporter he fought with was no longer working there. Finally, we've learned tonight the suspect worked for the federal government at the Department of Labor. Shannon.
All right, Trace Gallagher with the latest from the West Coast. Thank you very much. Local police staying tight-lipped, executing search warrants, not releasing a whole lot of details just yet, but let's break down what we know with Buck Sexton, former NYPD intelligence analyst and former CIA officer, and Randy Sutton, a former lieutenant with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Thank you both for being with us tonight.
Sure.
Randy, what do you make of what we know so far?
Well, there was a lot of red flags here. You know, this individual has been posting on social media as a threatening individual. He's come to the attention of law enforcement over the years, but this is that fine line. You know, law enforcement may identify someone as being a threat and a person that is capable of violence, but until they cross that line, their hands are tied. Now today, that simmering bubble burst, and the carnage is dramatic, and it's heartbreaking. The law enforcement response was amazing, to respond within a minute courageously, and it shows what a coward he truly was as he cowered under a desk and couldn't wait to surrender. He's a punk.
Yeah, to the point of the response time, I want to play something from the Anne Arundel County executive. This is what he said about the folks who showed up there so quickly.
I want to acknowledge the tremendous work of our public safety professionals today, particularly the Anne Arundel County Police Department, the Annapolis City Police Department, and the Anne Arundel County Sheriff's Office. They were on the scene in about 60 seconds. But beyond that, they went immediately into that building without a moment's hesitation and demonstrated incredible courage.
Buck, this is a field that you've worked in. I mean, these folks had just run this kind of drill. I imagine it's what departments across the country do, hoping they never have this day, but it sounds like when they did, they were ready.
Yes, I mean, the response time is unlikely to have been possibly better in any way. I mean, this is about as quick as you could expect it to go. And when you look at these events, when you have somebody who's dedicated to harming innocents in this way, had some familiarity with the location, probably done some reconnaissance on it beforehand, had some understanding of where exits and entryways were, that's when you're going to have a situation where you're trying to mitigate casualties. Very hard to eliminate them entirely, but it is likely here that because of the first responder time, you had fewer people killed and wounded. And in this circumstance, again, the training of the people coming in the front door helps, the training of the people that are actually responding, as well as the employees of the actual facility. Not a lot that can be done, though, that will completely eliminate this threat. It's just one of those things where you have somebody with a grudge who decides that he's going to go and shoot up a bunch of defenseless people. And there's very few satisfying security answers to how to stop this kind of thing from happening.
Yeah, and Randy, as Trace outlined a lot of what we know, or we think that we know, and the dots we think we can connect with the person who was allegedly responsible today. He was angry apparently about an article that had been written about a stalking case he was involved with, or a cyber harassment issue that he had been involved with. The woman in that article talked about the fact that, finally she was able to get him to stop it. Even during those few months that she didn't hear from him or have the harassment, she worried that he was kind of stewing and simmering in silence. And she was still worried that he was going to come back. What do you do?
She had every right to be worried about that, because there's no doubt that that's exactly what the situation was, that he was stewing, just as we see that this has been taking place over literally a period of years. And that's what's so frightening about this. This guy resurfaces after a silence of a couple of years. And you know, as the other gentleman said, there's very little that can mitigate this except for having, you know, armed security on the premises at all times. And who wants that in their life? The reality is that mental, we're going to hear a lot about mental illness in the next couple of days. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But the fact of the matter is that this individual is a killer, and he planned this, and he needs the full weight. If I don't know if they have a death penalty still in that state, but there's a guy that deserves it.
Yeah, I would tend to doubt it in Maryland, but I do not know that for sure. But Buck, I mean, we're being told there are reports that he tried to do something to injure his own fingertips so that they couldn't get fingerprints from him. We think that was the strategy.
Yes, I want to try to diagnose this individual from afar, and also not having an MD, that wouldn't be responsible of me, but it certainly seems like he's has some categorizations you'd expect for a psychopath. I mean, some things that you would think of somebody who's crazy, obviously. By the way, DNA is a much more important marker in a lot of these investigations than even fingerprints. So it's not an effective means of trying to prevent someone from being able to track you down. It's really just more of a bizarre thing to do. This is not what you would expect from a master criminal by any means.
Does it say anything to you about his state of mind or about the premeditation part of this?
Well, one of the problems, and you see this with radicalization in jihadist terrorist cases too, is that you have these precursors, you have these markers that you look for, and the FBI and behavioral units like the one the FBI has will set them out. But when you read them, when you become familiar with them, you'll see that it's disgruntled, upset with fellow employees, sometimes makes vague comments about violence. There's no bright red lines necessarily to look for in a case like this. There are a lot of angry, unhappy, lonely people who stalk people online, who say really nasty things on social media, as we all know. How do you catch that one person out of a huge mass of people that's actually going to go in and do this? The answer is it is unfortunately almost impossible. You're really hoping to get lucky, and in this case, we did not.
Yeah. All right, Buck Sexton and Randy Sutton, we thank you both for your expertise and for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right up next, in his first interview since the retirement of Justice Kennedy, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell speaks exclusively with us about the plans he says to make sure the new Supreme Court justice is in place before the midterms, no matter what the Democrats threaten to do. President Trump announces a summit with Vladimir Putin next month, and the left immediately launches a tirade. Ed Henry reporting on that for us tonight. Plus, Catherine Herridge joins us with details of the contentious hearing on Capitol Hill today as Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein clashes with GOP lawmakers as they demand documents and answers.
Why are you keeping information from Congress?
Congressman, I am not keeping any information from Congress that it's appropriate.
In a few minutes, Mr. Rosenstein, I think the House of Representatives is going to say something different.
This is a Fox News alert. The clock is ticking on a new nominee to replace retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy. It is also ticking down to the Helsinki summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin and our own President Trump. We're going to hear from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in just a minute, his first interview since the Kennedy announcement. But first up, Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry joins us with some late breaking developments. Hey, Ed.
That's right. Good to see you, Shannon. Breaking tonight, we're just learning from the White House that the president this evening had a meeting with some key players in the Senate who will be helping to decide whether or not his next Supreme Court pick will actually get confirmed. You can see some of the key players like Chuck Grassley, of course, the Republican chair of the Judiciary Committee, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, some key Republican moderates. But at the bottom there, the key is you have Democrats like Joe Manchin, Joe Donnelly, and Heidi Heitkamp. They're all Democrats facing re-election in strong Trump Republican states that went big for him by double digits, in fact, in 2016. That's interesting because the president's critics say he doesn't reach out to Democrats. Here he's clearly doing that. Heitkamp just put out a statement a few moments ago really praising the fact that he's reaching out. He wants to get Democratic votes. Contrast that to what you're seeing there. This protest from Democratic senators today, right out of the box, outside the Supreme Court, denouncing the idea that the president is going to try to get this pick done before the midterm elections, even though, as we reported last last night. Barack Obama got a Supreme Court nominee confirmed, Elena Kagan, before the 2010 midterms. And contrast the civility, the conversation at the White House tonight about advice and consent with what some Democratic senators and liberal commentators are saying. They're making it sound like this is the end of the world. Watch.
We're looking at a destruction of the Constitution of the United States, as far as I can tell, based on all of the folks that he's been appointing thus far for lifetime appointments.
This court is unbounded in its power, and it's not just the social issues we fight about, like abortion and marriage equality. It's everything,
right?
And it's all political.
And wherever you come down on any of these issues, I would hope that as an American, you don't want a potential criminal choosing one of our Supreme Court justices.
So bottom line, Democrats trying to say they're going to try to do everything they can to delay this, get this pushed past the midterm elections. You're going to talk to Senator McConnell in a moment. His number two, Republican Senator John Cornyn today said, ain't going to happen in terms of delaying it. He says this is going to get done before the midterm election, Shannon.
They sound pretty firm on that. Okay, so the president touting this summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but is everybody who matters to this, are they all on board?
No, European allies are upset about this. They don't like Putin. They don't like the idea of this president getting closer to Putin. You see the summit will be July 16 in Finland, the second big summit for the president in just a span of a few weeks, obviously, after Singapore with the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. This is a chance for the president to sit down with Vladimir Putin, talk about a range of national security issues, paving the way. You have the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who met with Putin yesterday, in fact, in Russia. After that meeting, a top Putin aide again reiterated that Russia claims they did not meddle in the 2016 election. The president tweeting today much the same, that Russia says it did not meddle in the election. The president's critics not having any of that, saying this shows why they believe the president is too cozy with Putin. But the president and the Russian ambassador to the UN today said, calm down. There could be some fruitful negotiations ahead. Watch.
We can all get along. It's going to be great. The world has to start getting along.
I think that primarily it will be devoted to the state of our bilateral relations, which is to be desired to be much better, if I put it very mildly.
It will be awkward that next month this one-on-one meeting between the Russian president and President Trump will happen while the special counsel Robert Mueller's probe is still going in terms of Russian interference in the 2016 election. But remember what the president has said dating back to the campaign, that it's not such a bad thing for any U.S. president to get closer to Russia if they can help on some key issues like Syria, Iran. We'll see whether they can make any progress at this summit, Shannon.
We will. Ed Henry, thank you very much.
Great to see you.
Well, tempers flaring as DOJ official Rod Rosenstein and FBI Director Christopher Wray testify before Congress. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge was there. She joins us with new fallout tonight. Catherine?
Russia isn't being hurt by this investigation right now. We are.
The ripple effect of the special counsel probe dominated the hearing.
Whatever you got, finish it the hell up, because this country is being torn apart.
We are not going to do our investigation subject to any political influence by either side.
The FBI's alleged use of confidential sources to gather intelligence about Trump campaign aides drew fireworks.
Congressman, I am not keeping any information from Congress.
In a few minutes, Mr. Rosenstein, I think the House of Representatives is going to say something different.
I don't believe that's what they're going to say, and if they do, they'll be mistaken.
Disagree, but
as the hearing unfolded by a vote of 226 to 183, the House passed a non-binding resolution calling on Rosenstein to provide withheld documents under congressional subpoena.
Or do you believe that you have the ability to be above the law, something the American people do not?
No, sir, I do not have the ability.
Good.
For Republicans, there were other frustrations.
So you won't say to this committee whether or not you even read the document you signed that authorized spying on people associated with the Trump campaign?
Well, I dispute your characterization of what that FISA is about, sir.
On allegations documented to the House General Counsel, first reported by Fox News, that Rosenstein threatened congressional investigators over the records requests.
Who are we supposed to believe? Staff members who we've worked with, who've never misled us, or you guys who we've caught hiding information from us, who tell a witness not to answer our questions? Who are we supposed to believe? The Department of Justice.
Me because I'm telling the truth and I'm under oath. And if you want to put somebody else under oath and they have something different,
I know these staff members.
Democrats defended the Republican-appointed witnesses.
Am I correct that each of you were appointed by President Trump?
that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Wright, are you one of those 13 angry Democrats that my Republican colleagues keep referring to?
I do not consider myself an angry Democrat. You can be quite
Are you a
confident of
Democrat? Mr. Rosenstein, are you a Democrat?
I'm not a Democrat, and I'm not angry.
The deadline for the non-binding House resolution is July 6th. Lawmakers return the following week from the holiday recess. The FBI and Justice Department continue to cite the need to protect sources and methods, as well as the ongoing Russia investigation. Shannon?
Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. When we return, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, his first interview since the retirement announcement from Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. Democrats say they'll do whatever it takes to block a vote on a nominee before the midterms. You'll get McConnell's reaction next. Democrats are rallying today, accusing Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of being a hypocrite as the Kentucky Republican vows swift confirmation of a successor to retiring Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. The Majority Leader joins us now from his office on Capitol Hill. Good to see you tonight, sir.
Shannon, glad to be with you.
Okay, so let's talk about this because it sounds like you and your Democratic colleagues there in the Senate have a different idea or a different schedule idea of how this is going to play out. I want to play a little bit of Democratic Senator from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand. Here's what she says.
Mitch McConnell has set the rules. He said we will not allow a Supreme Court justice during an election year. Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We should not allow a justice in an election year.
Your response, sir?
She left out an important word. What I said in 2016 is that we shouldn't fill a Supreme Court vacancy in the middle of a presidential election year. The last time I looked, there is no presidential election this year. And in fact, 3 current members of the U.S. Supreme Court were completed in election years, non-presidential election years. And the president's nominee to this Kennedy vacancy will be confirmed in a non-presidential election year. We expect to get a nomination from the president rather soon, and we should be able to work our way through the confirmation process sometime before early fall, hopefully in time for the new justice to begin the fall term of the Supreme Court, which, as an old Supreme Court reporter, you know, is the first Monday in October.
It always is. All right, some other folks and their thoughts on your timeline. Senator Kamala Harris, she says this appointment is potentially looking at the destruction of the U.S. Constitution. We cannot relent on pushing back. The top Democrat there in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, saying this: we will fight the nominee to the end. He doesn't have a name yet, but it sounds like he has a plan.
Yeah, well, it's pretty obvious they're ready to fight no matter who the nominee is. And look, the stakes are big, and the Democrats, let me tell you what they want and the kind of people they put on the courts. Activist judges. What do we mean when we say an activist judge? Someone who acts like they were elected to the Congress to make policy. Justice Scalia, who is the towering figure on the Supreme Court, right up there with Oliver Wendell Holmes in the annals of Supreme Court history in the United States, always used to say that you're not a very good judge if occasionally you don't reach a conclusion you don't like. And the reason for that is the law requires it. The plain meaning of the law requires it, or the Constitution requires it. And if you want to make policy, you ought to run for office. So the kind of people the president's been sending up for the circuit courts, the nomination of Neil Gorsuch, these are people who don't believe the job of a judge is to act like you're a member of Congress, but rather to interpret the law, which is what the founding fathers clearly had in mind for the judicial branch.
Mm-hmm. It's a little stunning when we remember that Justice Kennedy was confirmed by the Senate 97-0. It's hard to imagine anything near that happening these days. Clearly, you're going to have opposition from the Democrats.
Yeah.
But what about some complications on the GOP side? The current absence of Senator McCain, obviously very ill and still holding his seat there in Arizona. I mean, what are your concerns as you look ahead to a vote?
Well, we're hoping there will be some Democratic support. Remember that Justice Gorsuch got at least 3 Senate Democrats who supported his confirmation. Those individuals are still in the Senate. We're not assuming this is just going to be a straight party line vote. I think there will be some Democrats who will find the nominee attractive. We'll have to see. We don't have a nominee yet. It's a lot easier to talk about it once you do.
All right, the nominee that you had last time that you shepherded through, and the left's very upset, obviously, this week, talking about the fact that you held open the late Justice Scalia's seat for nearly a year. Then Justice Gorsuch, the newest addition to the bench, was there for some very important 5-4 decisions in closing out this term, including the travel ban, which was decided in the president's favor, the union dues case that was decided in favor of those who think you shouldn't be forced to pay union dues. Some interesting tweets from your Team Mitch Twitter account. One of them with nothing but a picture of you shaking Justice Gorsuch's hand, no text. The other one that looked like a little bit of a dance party involving you. Is this some world-class trolling of folks who are not happy or not enjoying what's happened at the Supreme Court this week?
Well, obviously, I'm pleased with the president's nomination of Justice Gorsuch, and we're happy that he is very similar to Justice Scalia. That didn't really change the balance of the court. And Justice Kennedy has been most of the time what you'd call a kind of right-of-center justice. So even his replacement is not likely to dramatically change the court. I don't know why the Democrats are so alarmed. They've already been unhappy with most of the decisions reached by the current Supreme Court.
Okay, well, they don't feel very hopeful moving forward, knowing about that replacement coming. I want to read something from George Will, who obviously has had a lot of criticism for the GOP and questioning his ties to it over the last couple of years. He says this. He says, the congressional Republican caucuses must be substantially reduced in the midterms he's referring to, so substantially that the remnants reduced to minorities will be stripped of the Constitution's Article I powers that they've been too invertebrate to use against the current wielder of Article II powers. They will then have leisure time to wonder why they work so hard to achieve membership in a legislature whose unexercised muscles have atrophied because of people like them. What do you think of that?
Well, I obviously disagree with George Will. He's a friend of mine, and I admire his writing, but I think he's totally wrong. From a right-of-center point of view, the last year and a half have been the best year and a half in the 30-some-odd years I've been in the Senate. The Supreme Court, 21 new circuit judges, all strict constructionists, 18 uses of the Congressional Review Act to deal with the overregulation of the Obama years, comprehensive tax reform, new innovative approaches to the Veterans Administration and the taking care of veterans, a revisitation of Dodd-Frank. If you like America right of center, it's hard to find a better year and a half than the one we are in the process of going through. Look, we don't have this opportunity very often. There have been only 20 years out of the last 100, Shannon, where Republicans have had the House, the Senate, and the presidency. I don't think we've wasted a minute of this opportunity the American people gave us in 2016 to move America in a different direction.
We know there are frustrations with those who wanted a clean repeal of Obamacare or large chunks of it. People now frustrated that nothing seems to be able to get through when it comes to immigration. A number of different measures you put up, and they were all shut down. They couldn't get to 60. They couldn't get any kind of coalescence around them. They're frustrated, and you've got people calling for a change to the legislative filibuster. Do you foresee a time when you would be willing to take that down to 51 votes? And do you think the Democrats would do it if they end up with 51?
The answer is no and no. I wouldn't do it and they wouldn't do it. And that would fundamentally alter the Senate in a way that I think our party would not like in the long term. Remember, I just said we only rarely control all three branches of government. But for the requirement of getting 60 votes, the Democrats would have already passed socialized medicine during the Obama years. They would have already gotten rid of state right-to-work laws during the Obama years. I think it's important to take a longer view of the best way to protect conservatism in the country. And frankly, we have not had a dominant position all that often in the United States Senate. And so the requirement of the Democrats to get 60 votes has saved us from an awful lot of left-wing policies over the years.
I want to ask you, too, about people who say that Republican leaders, and there's a hint of this in what George Will is saying, not more than a hint, that Republican leaders aren't standing up to President Trump when he is getting things wrong, in George Will's view and others' views, who thinks he's actually hurting the party for the long term. How would you describe your relationship, your working relationship or personal, with the president?
The president enjoys overwhelming support here in Congress. There are a few members who complained about one thing or another. I remember that being the case when Democrats complained about Obama. I, for example, have supported the president 96% of the time. We're overwhelmingly in support of his legislative agenda. The president has solid support in the House and Senate among Republicans.
All right, I want to take you back a few days to, you were, I believe, on Georgetown's campus with your wife, who is the Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao. We've got a little video of some folks that at least are identified on social media as students and how this played out. We're going to take a look at that.
Why are you separating families? Huh? Why are you separating families? Why are you separating families? Why did you leave my husband alone? Why are you separating families? Why did you leave my husband alone? I'm not trying to disrespect you, but why is he separating families?
He's not.
I'm not trying to disrespect you. I'm not trying to disrespect you. He's separating families. He's separating families.
You listen.
No.
Well, she's not only an accomplished woman in her own right on many levels, but she seems pretty tough there when it comes to folks coming after you, too.
Yeah, you know, Shannon, I said to Elaine, I said, well, why don't you just quietly get in the car? She ignored my advice and went right up to him and told him what she thought. I loved it. It went viral on the internet, and I've got one tough wife. I'm really proud of her.
Yeah, and people may think twice about approaching the two of you out in public. What do you make of this call by some on the left who say that it's appropriate in a free country to find people that they disagree with, whether they support this administration or work with this administration, and that you should call them out and confront them anywhere you see them in public?
Look, I'm a big believer in free speech. And sometimes what people say is not great. I do think poor behavior is not a great way to convey your views. And I think getting in people's faces in public places and trying to make them uncomfortable it certainly is not a great way to sell your point of view. But I think everybody ought to have their fair say. You know, Shannon, you've worked in Washington a long time. There's somebody demonstrating over something here every day somewhere in Washington. I revere their right to do that. I do think it would be better that they be polite and certainly not threaten people, because that's when you step over the line.
Yeah, whether you agree with these folks or not, it is kind of a beautiful thing, and I tell visitors to town, just, walk a few blocks, you'll find one, and it is a beautiful thing about this country to see that freedom as it plays out peacefully. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, sir, we'll see you quite a bit this summer and into the fall. We'll follow this confirmation hearing as it gears up. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
When we return, instant reaction to our exclusive interview with the Senate Majority Leader. Can the Democrats stop Mitch McConnell and Republicans from confirming a new Supreme Court justice before the midterms? We'll talk about it with Ben Shapiro, syndicated columnist and host of the Ben Shapiro Show. He weighs in live on that and more when we return. All right, you heard Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He is planning to confirm a new Supreme Court justice by October. Advocacy groups, Democrats, wasting no time jumping into the emerging campaign to stop any replacement, which could solidify the court's conservative wing for decades. Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief to the Daily Wire and host of the Ben Shapiro Show, is here to weigh in. What do you make of what he had to say tonight, Ben? It sounds like he's not even bothered by anything we're hearing from the left. He has no intention of acceding to any of their demands because he's in control.
Well, I mean, you can see that the amount of just wild enthusiasm just emanates from Mitch McConnell every moment that you're with him. But that really is enthusiastic Mitch McConnell. I mean, really, the guy.
That is him excited. That is him excited.
Yeah, that's him excited, right? I mean, for a guy Don Blankenship termed Cocaine Mitch. I mean, if that's Mitch McConnell on the natural cocaine of a good political cycle, you hate to think what he's like when he's downgrade. But it is amazing. I mean, what he's saying there is basically correct. As for everything from the filibuster, which he was right about in 2013 when Harry Reid decided to nuke the filibuster over judges, to what he's saying, about immigration. The fact is that Mitch McConnell, who I think a lot of conservatives have been very critical of, if it were not for Mitch McConnell, at least one seat on the Supreme Court would have gone to Barack Obama. And Mitch McConnell deserves an awful lot of credit for the fact that this is now a swing seat and not just the replacement of another seat with a conservative.
So we talked about the fact that he thinks they can actually work on this and get a couple of Democrat votes. We obviously think there are those folks in red states that we keep focusing on who are up for re-election this fall: Manchin, Heitkamp, Donnelly. He may have trouble trouble with a couple of Republicans. I mean, Collins and Murkowski, if there's a pro-life, pro-choice issue, they may be out on a nominee. So let's talk about a couple of Democrats. First of all, I want to play this from Joe Manchin and get your reaction.
Whoever that nominee, I always look at the qualifications of the person. I'll look at the qualifications of whoever is sent up and go through it diligently. I mean, I think the process is what it's supposed to be, and that's our job to do what we're going to do.
It seems like
which is basically to look and to review, to be able to confirm and consent.
I mean, that sounds like him, Ben, from the years that we've known him on the Hill and prior to that in West Virginia. I mean, he is a measured guy who says, I'm at least going to take a look at the qualifications for the person before I say absolutely not.
Yeah, and I think that he has to say that because here's the thing. There's a good shot he votes for whoever Trump puts up here because the qualifications for whomever Trump puts up, barring, a Harriet Miers type nomination, are going to be quite good, right? The top five that Trump is looking at right now, all of them are currently sitting on courts of appeals. All of them have solid educational backgrounds. All of them are intellectual heavyweights, I think. And that means that if you're just looking in terms of pure qualifications, Manchin's probably going to vote for them. So this is a good way for him to say, listen, I'm voting on the basis of qualifications, not on the basis of litmus tests. I do have to say the entire judicial nomination process drives me incredibly up a wall ever since Robert Bork. The idea that you can't ask a judge anything that actually means anything. You just have to ask them incredibly vague questions, and then you have to read tea leaves based on their old decisions to determine how they're going to vote on particular issues. That seems to really hold true mainly with conservative or textualist or originalist judges. It doesn't hold true for the left. One thing that's amazing to note is that the Democrats, whenever they nominate someone, they have been literally 100% of the people they've nominated have voted consistently to the left. And only about 50% of the people that Republicans have actually nominated to the high court have voted consistently on originalist or textualist grounds. Virtually every Republican president in the last half century has screwed up at least one judicial pick, which means that Republicans should be very cautious and careful about whomever Trump puts up. They should really demand that be a person who is fully committed, openly committed to textualism and conservatism, not even conservatism, originalism, to the text of the Constitution as it was originally constructed and meant.
Yeah, if they want to have somebody that follows the philosophy they expect. I want to ask you about this. Who do you think of this benefits or hurts in the midterms? Because both sides are gearing up saying it's a win for them. But listen, McConnell likely gets someone confirmed before the midterms. They solidify that seat. But I got to think that's going to fire up the Democratic base to come out and say in these midterms, you don't want that to happen again. You better show up at the polls.
I mean, I think that the Democratic base will be very fired up. But the fact is, I think the Democratic base was probably going to be fired up anyway. I wonder what additional points were necessary to get them to the polls, given the extreme hatred of President Trump personally. So, listen, I think turnout will be a lot higher than normal in the midterms. It depends on whether this actually gets drawn out through the Senate elections themselves. And Democrats have a real disadvantage in terms of the Senate seats that are up. I mean, there are 5 to 8 Senate seats that could go Republican if Republicans turn out in the next election cycle. But you could see a real reflection in the House seats, right? You could see that it makes it easier for Democrats to take the House.
Well, we'll see. Ben Shapiro, always great to have you chat with us. Thanks for visiting.
Thanks a lot.
All right, the First Lady visits the southern border again, visiting immigration detention centers. This time, no clothing controversy. More on Melania Trump's visit when we return. First Lady Melania Trump returning to the border today after her last trip. You'll remember the media was focused on her wardrobe and what message they thought she might be trying to send. The president said at the time it was a slap at the so-called fake news media. Well, today the focus was different. A local reporter describing how the First Lady had a touching moment with a little boy at a Phoenix center. The Border Patrol shared a number of personal stories with her. And then Mrs. Trump was also shown a photo by Border Patrol officers of a 6-year-old left near Luke Air Force Base with a Coke bottle and a note.
Something that our people encounter on a daily basis is seeing children that are put in families in very dangerous situations.
It's incredible. As young as 6 years old, somebody would leave him. Wow, very sad.
As usual, First Lady was trailed by protesters who said she wasn't welcome in Arizona. Meanwhile, back here in the nation's capital, the battle over immigration boiling over with activists who want ICE. The Immigration Enforcement Agency abolished. More than 575 activists were arrested on Capitol Hill today, including the rare bust of a sitting member of Congress. Washington Democrat Pramila Jayapal was arrested along with others for demonstrating inside a congressional office building. Stay with us. Our Midnight Hero is next.